Lay your burden down,
every care you carry,
and come to the table of grace.
for there is mercy.
Come just as you are.
We are all unworthy to enter the presence of God, for He is holy. Lift up your heart, lift up your hands, fall on your knees and pray, for the King of Kings and the love He brings is here in this place. We raise our voices, raise our song, we offer Him our praise, for the King of Kings and the joy He brings is here. He is here in this place.
Lay your burden down,
Every care you carry,
and come to the table of grace.
for there is mercy.
Come just as you are.
We are all unworthy to enter the presence of God, for He is holy. Lift up your heart, lift up your hands, fall on your knees and pray, for the King of Kings and the love He brings is here in this place. We raise our voices, raise our song, we offer Him our praise, for the King of Kings and the joy He brings is here in this place. Lift up your heart, lift up your hands, fall on your knees and pray, for the King of Kings and the love He brings is here in this place. We raise our voices, raise our song, we offer Him our praise, for the King of Kings and the joy He brings is here. He is here in this place.
There is a Redeemer, Jesus, God's own Son, precious Lamb of God, Messiah, Holy One.
Thank you, oh my Father, for giving us your Son and leaving your Spirit till the work on earth is done.
Jesus, my Redeemer, name above all names, precious Lamb of God, Messiah, hope for sinners slain.
Thank you, oh my Father, for giving us your Son and leaving your Spirit till the work on earth is done.
When I stand in glory, There I'll serve my King forever in that holy place.
Thank you, oh my Father, for giving us your Son and leaving your Spirit till the work on earth is done. Thank you, oh my Father, for giving us your Son and leaving your Spirit till the work on earth is done. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. We will pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May all who love you be secure. May there always be peace within your walls. May goodness and hope always endure. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. For the sake of our brothers and our friends, may peace be with you all your days. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, may goodness be found in all your ways. Let your kingdom rise, let your people sing of your matchless grace and your endless mercy. Let your church cry out, let hosannas ring from the highest hill and the deepest valley. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. Let us go to the house of the Lord. Let our feet stand in your gates. Let our feet stand in your gates. Some days I can't seem to find a reason to trust that there's more than the pain of this world, more than the fear in my heart. Just when it seems hope is gone, the sunrise reveals your awesome glory. There is no shadow, no fear that can stand in your wonderful light. You are my highest.
No, it's just me. Last summer, I was pretty miserable. Just having a hard time talking about it. Having a hard time. Yeah. Yeah. So that was hard.
Thank y'all for being here today and weathering the weather. And we are in Ecclesiastes this morning, chapter 1. I don't know why the microphone on Tuesdays always sounds like, maybe it's the room is empty. It just sounds like a open gymnasium sound, bounce back and forth. Anyway, so we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And one of the things that we've tried to emphasize as we've gone through the book, or started the book, I should say, is that there's a lot of different ways people look at the book. And trying to understand who the teacher is, or Koheleth. And in our introduction last week, we talked about how different views are taken, but I still come back believing that Ecclesiastes is the collection of writings that came from Solomon through his wisdom, more than likely in the penitent age of his life when he was old. And so he has the ability to look back and recognize what the real meaning of life is, a meaning of life that he had not fully lived all his life. But also in it, as it begins in verse 3 through verse 11, is this poem about the nature of life. And he introduces what he thinks the nature of life is in verse 2 with saying, all is vanity. The Christian Standard says absolute futility. Everything is futile. That when you start looking at life, no matter which pursuit you go down, there are things that feel like it's just a giant proverbial waste of time. And and I even made the comment, I think I did last week, about a young man I was studying with, and he made the comment that, he pays his bills, he takes care of his life, he goes to work every day, he's a good worker, he's a good citizen, and there has to be more to life than that. And so Ecclesiastes describes that sentiment, that journey, that exploration. And so the writer Koheleth, Solomon, talks about how he spent his life on this giant journey. So we start in verse 12 today, and reminding ourselves again that one of the reasons that I come back to recognizing verse 12, I, the teacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, that is very indicative of Solomon. The statement doesn't occur anywhere else in Scripture. It doesn't say that Solomon was king over Israel and Jerusalem. But there's only two kings that can truly be that king over Israel, the united Israel in Jerusalem. And that would be Solomon or David. You could potentially say Saul was a king, but he did not reign from Jerusalem. So consequently, here we are, we're back to David and Solomon. And what does verse 1 say? The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. So we just keep coming full circle back to Solomon is the person who fits the bill on this. So he says in verse 13, reading from the Christian Standard, first, I applied my mind to examine and explore through wisdom all that is done under heaven. I turned to my page too early. God has given people this miserable task to keep them occupied. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun and have found everything to be futile, a pursuit of the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, see, I have amassed wisdom far beyond all those who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has thoroughly grasped wisdom and knowledge. I applied my mind to know wisdom and knowledge, madness and folly, and I learned that this too is a pursuit of the wind. For with much wisdom is much sorrow. As knowledge increases, grief increases. So on the spectrum of sunshine and darkness, where does chapter 1 begin? Yeah, pretty dark. He's not, I've got sunshine on my shoulders today. That's not how he looks at life. The Christian Standard actually interprets a little bit in the way that it gives the sense, but even though I think that they're correct. But in verse 13, the English Standard says, "Then I saw that there is more." I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong. Am I in the right chapter? No, sorry. So in chapter 1, notice how it translates this in verse 13. "And I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom by all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with." That's the English Standard's approach to looking at the text. But the idea of vanity, what immediately comes to your mind when you hear those words? Vanity.
I think so.
You think of what?
Like being vain.
Okay, prideful. Okay, all right. We have magazines. Vanity Fair. I read it all the time, of course. No, I'm kidding. But even by the very title, the things that are in the magazine, not that I've read it, I'm just making some assumptions, so I'm not trying to put down any editor of the magazine or anything. But by and large, most of the things that are in those magazines, and Vanity Fair is not the only one, are things that are passing away. They're things that are truly vanity from Solomon's perspective. Talking about that even today. There are tasks that we undergo or that we do, and particularly a mother. She gets up in the morning, she makes breakfast for her kids go to school. What does she start doing? Laundry, and then she does laundry, and then she folds up the laundry, and then she puts the laundry in their bedrooms, and then they come home from school, and what do they do with everything that she put carefully in their bedroom? Toss it aside, throw it on the ground, and then the cycle starts all over again, you know. It is the life that we see every day occurring, and there probably isn't a mother alive that says, I'm not going to do that anymore because it's a big waste of time. And so Solomon starts after this poem that shows that life is cyclical, that you get up, the sun rises, the sun sets, the winds go wherever they choose. We have no controls over anything that's happening in life. And so when he introduces his journey here in chapter 1, verse 12, he says, this is what I've done. I've applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. I'm going to try to make sense of everything that's here by exploring wisdom. But he said from the very outset that it's unhappy, English Standard, Christian Standard, miserable, this miserable task. And notice he says and attributes that who gave us this task? Verse 13. God. Okay? And immediately you might think, well, that's not right, but is it? When Adam and Eve are cast from the garden, what were they to do and toil in? With labor, by the sweat, I think the King James says, by the sweat of your brow, okay? Even the book of Galatians and the writer of Hebrews as well, when they talk about the law that God gave, was the law intended to ever stay permanently? No, it was intended to be a passing reality in Israel's existence to prepare Israel and the world for the coming of Messiah. But both aspects of the law taught us the inability of us to be righteous by it. Okay? And if we're unrighteous by it, what do we want to do with that law? The very famous statement that I said a long time ago that my kids will never ever let me forget, you drop kick it, okay? You know, you drop kick the law. It's like, well, why am I bothering trying to keep the law if I'm never going to be righteous by it? There is a futility that God wanted Israel to see in the giving of law to being righteous by a law system, because we will never be that way. So if the law given by God created that sense of futility, what does life do? Exactly the same thing. God has given us this life, this miserable existence, to teach us something. And ultimately, that teaching of something is where he'll get to the end. Notice in verse 15, that's his first observation. What does he say? Things which are crooked can't be made straight. That which is lacking can't be counted. He's not observing that this is the way that it always is. Obviously, you can gather together your apples that are supposed to be a dozen, and you can count, and if there's 11, he's not saying, well, you can't count that there's 11. You can count that there's 11. But the point is that what we work to make perfect in our life always comes up short. Like my retaining wall, George Chapman, okay? Built my retaining wall. I thought I did a great job of it with the help of all my good friends, and it's failed, you know. We go through that life reality that's just, not that I'm justifying anything that I did, but or criticizing anything anyone else did. It's just, that is the cycle of reality of life. So I said to myself, verse 16, reading from the English Standard, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experiences of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this also was striving after wind. So he says that he's amassed, is the Christian standard, I've gathered or acquired wisdom, so much wisdom that it was more than those who had preceded him. So when Solomon says this, who gave him this wisdom? God did. By means of his request when he first became king, God was pleased with his request and gave him wisdom. And the text says in 1 Kings that he has had there had been no wisdom before him and no wisdom after him like the wisdom that Solomon had. But he adds, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Not only has he given this wisdom, what else had gone on in his life? He had experienced wisdom. Just like those moments when you and I know that something is going to work out better if we do it this way, and then we do it this way, and then it works super well, what do we feel? A great experience of thrill that it worked, until it will fail later down the life's path. But he says, that's the point, is I have experienced wisdom and knowledge. Can you think of anything in Solomon's life where that would be the case? Do you remember the very famous test of his wisdom that happened early in his reign? Two women who had argued that the child that had died was their child. And the story goes that what did Solomon say to do?
Well, there was a living child.
There was the living child and the dead child. And what are we going to do with this living child? Divide it between the women. To even suggest the idea sounds ludicrous and crazy and inhumane. But what did Solomon see before he ever asked this and made the statement? That the real mother wouldn't allow it. He just knew that, and he was relying on that human nature that he knew would be evident. And so that he makes this very shocking declaration. And immediately what happened?
The mother sacrifices.
The mother was willing to sacrifice the child so the child could live. And so Solomon knew exactly who the mother was. Does that make sense? It's not like God gave him a sign and says, that's the real woman. But rather, the wisdom of life teaches us how to anticipate what's going to happen. Are we always right? No. But when you have that experience and wisdom teaches you, there is this great sense of accomplishment, this great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And so he says, I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Now, the word madness and folly is consistent in most translations. When we hear the word folly, what do we think of? Particularly from Proverb. Fools, okay? When we hear the word madness, what do we think of? Insanity, okay? So I don't think Solomon is saying, I pursued being insane and a fool. I don't think that's his point. In fact, the expression, especially when they're put together, certainly is the opposite of wisdom. There is an opposite aspect of what these words are suggesting. But even before my day, and it may have been, I'm going to just be credit to everybody, before your days. But there were follies in our culture. And you would go see the follies. What was that, anybody? What were the follies? Follies. Entertainment. Okay? You want what's going and seeing the follies? Spending your time watching entertaining stuff, feeling good about it. But what would happen, my wife can't listen to this, but what would happen if you spent all of your days for the entire rest of the year going to Disneyland? It would get old, okay? Except for her, but it would get old, okay? You know, and that's what I think Solomon is saying. He pursued folly and madness. He pursued the things that people sought out to bring them pleasure. And not, admittedly, some of those things might be the fool's mission. Some of those things might be insanity. People who go to Disneyland, put everything on a credit card, and they pay debt and debt and debt and debt and debt for the rest of their lives. To us, that would be madness, right? Okay, so it's the usage of those words that I think Solomon is referring to. He's not necessarily making a moral judgment on the things. He's talking about the effect that those things have in our life. When you have wisdom, it has this kind of effect in your life. When you pursue madness and folly, it has this effect on you. Two contrasting effects. But then he said, I learned also that I perceive that this also is chasing the wind, striving after wind, that it ultimately will not have any final useful bearing to my life. So that's why he says in verse 18, for with much wisdom is much sorrow or vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. The Christian Standard uses the word grief. So as he begins the picture of his pursuit, he's saying that even with him acquiring wisdom that no one else had ever had, what came with it? Vexation, or the Christian Standard uses the word sorrow there. Vexation, what is it to be vexed? Not vaxed, vexed. You get tired of it? Okay.
I think of turmoil and conflict, like if you're vexed over something,
What does a parent feel when their children are pursuing an unwise way? Vexed. Because our knowledge of wisdom, this would be much better in your life. And when they pursue an unwise way, it's vexing. Because in one way, as a parent, you want to, when they're younger, you can control the choices they make. But when they become adults, you got to let go, right? Okay. And so it's vexing. And I think that's his point. I have all of this wisdom, but I see all around me people pursuing unwise ways and not even following the wisdom of my words. But I'm going to add this. When you look back over your life and I'm 59. Look back over or 59 this year. I'm 58 and a half, whatever. When you look back over your life, and maybe not just looking over things that are sinful in your life, but you look back over and you think of your foolish mistakes. What do you feel? I knew better. And when you look back and I knew better, what's the result? I feel vexed. I feel great sorrow. And so I think Solomon, in making this observation, for with much wisdom is much sorrow, it's not just, or much vexation, it's not just vexation over everybody else's non-response to wisdom. I think it's including his own self-analysis of himself. And as knowledge increases, so does sorrow, or so does grief, as the Christian Standard says. Any comments or questions over that?
I think too, in some ways, it increases our knowledge, increases sorrow, grief. There's a lot of talk about social media, how, and even like world news, is that we as humans weren't meant to take in,
Absorb so much.
absorb so much of the sorrow and the grief and the tragedy in the world, that our minds aren't meant to take all that in. And I think that could, that it increases knowledge. We think it's good to be in the know. We think it's good to know everything that's happening, and but it's not.
Yeah. Or the more that we know, the more burdensome it is, right? And so for with much wisdom is much sorrow, as knowledge increases, grief increases, that the more that we take in the futility of life and witness the futility of life around us, the more hard it is to bear. Okay? Any thoughts or questions before we move on? We're moving a little ahead, but that's okay. We'll get to some difficult parts that'll slow us down. So in chapter 2, so I said to myself, or I said in my heart, this is what I'm going to do. So he begins opening up in this long, it's not long, but in these 2 chapters about the things that he was seeking for and realizing their futility. And we go back to the point of the things that are about to be mentioned are all things that Solomon was acclimated and capable of because of the wealth and the power and the growth of the kingdom, all when he was king. There were other kings that did not rule from Jerusalem when Israel, particularly the northern 10 tribes, there were periods of great financial gain and growth within the society. Although they were practicing idolatry, God allowed the country to be blessed, the northern 10 tribes. But that king was not ruling from Jerusalem. This is Solomon. And the golden age of David and Solomon reached its pinnacle during Solomon's time. So he said to myself, go ahead, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy what is good. So he's going to test himself with pleasure. I'm going to give myself as much pleasure as I can, and I'm going to enjoy myself. Okay? But behold, this was all futile. Notice this continual repetition. In the Christian Standard, it keeps using the word futile versus the word vanity, but most translations will translate that Hebrew word vain or vanity. So behold, this also was vanity. Notice the next thing is, I said of laughter. What do you say of laughter?
It is mad.
It's mad. Okay. So Solomon's saying, don't ever laugh. No. Remember, the book of Ecclesiastes, probably more than any other book, is critical for us to understand context, thou art a jewel. We have to see the whole message of the book to understand what each verse means. Because we could take this verse out of context and tell someone when they're laughing, well, this is what Solomon said, laughter is this, and so you just need to stop laughing. Okay, well, that's not a right application of the text. But what he was doing is he was seeking pleasure through laughter. And he said, it's madness. And then the next word, and of pleasure. And ultimately he says, what use is that? The more that he pursued these things that were self-pleasuring, and don't misunderstand my point, does God want us to find no pleasure in the things that we pursue? I don't think so at all. But his point is that I can't find the pleasure my soul needs there. I can't find pleasure that my soul needs in laughter. People will say, I've never gone to a comedy club or even a comedian's act about laughing. But occasionally when I watch funny little short videos and I start laughing, Tracy comments to me, says, I love hearing you watch that because I love hearing you laugh. Probably because I don't laugh enough in my life. But still, laughter is an expression of a moment when you find what is funny or humorous and you laugh, and it lifts your soul from its weight. But if I laughed all the time, then what am I also missing? Yeah, I'd be oblivious to the sobriety of the world or the sadness of the world, where I can be a blessing to help people in their sadness. So, and we know that because of the whole story of Ecclesiastes. Okay? The next thing he says, verse 3, I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do during the days of his life. I'm going to stop there. We will come to this verse, and it will never fail that we'll have a conversation with someone who wants us to be able to drink socially and say, see, his mind was still guiding his mind with wisdom while he was using wine. Well, that's not the reason he said that. And he's not even trying to endorse the pull of wine on his body because, number one, if we were trying to use this verse to authenticate a claim for social drinking, what kind of wine is he talking about? The wine of their day. It did not look like the wine of our day. Because the wine of their day was always watered down. Always. 3 parts water, usually to 1 part wine. So it's not even looking like the wine of our day. If you bought wine today and you put 3 parts water in it and drank it, that probably still might be a little bit more strong than their wine, but it would be like the same.
This almost to me sounds too like, and we know it's not good for us people can become an alcoholic, not that this is anything like that, but it's like self-medicating.
Right.
If you're looking to dull pain and not feel pain, so it says he's searching how to cheer my body. I don't know, that's just what it made me think of, is like someone who's trying to self-medicate with
Okay.
alcohol, take off the edge, or hide from sadness.
I think the key is at the end of the verse, he says, in the English Standard it says, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do. My translation, or the Christian Standard said, he says, and how to grasp folly until I could see what is good for people to do under heaven. I think he's saying, I saw other people having joy and happiness while they were drinking. So I thought, I need to do that too. If I'm going to pursue folly, and if I'm going to pursue pleasure as a means of finding some sense of contentment in life, and I was just going there and laughing. Well, people that were sitting next to me were drinking a little bit, so I'm going to drink a little bit too. I think that's what he's saying. And my mind still guiding me with wisdom is what he says he's doing with everything, not just the drinking of the wine. Not that he was just making sure he didn't get drunk, even though I think that might be implicit. But I think what he's simply saying is that my mind was trying to apply this wisdom to all of this, and I thought, well, I'm going to try that too. And maybe it means that he said, well, I'm going to drink the wine without water. But the point is all he is saying is that I was trying to see what people saw in it. And what did he realize? He doesn't tell us in verse 3. But what does he say in verse 11? I found everything to be futile. Sorry, hey, Don just made a new word, futile. Futile and a pursuit of the wind. Well, that includes everything in this context. So he's not endorsing drinking under moderation. That's not under his consideration. And I'm not trying to say that that's wrong, nor am I trying to say that that's right. I'm just saying that this verse has nothing to do with what we're trying to prove from that. It's simply saying that pursuing all of these things as if they themselves will give you some sense of peace will not happen. So then he says in verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and I planted vineyards for myself. In the Christian Standard, it adds, I increased my achievements. I built houses, planted vineyards for myself. Going on in verse 5, I made gardens and parks for myself and planted every kind of fruit tree in them. I constructed reservoirs for myself from which to irrigate a grove of flourishing trees, etc. I'm going to stop right there. And I don't think it's unfair to make this observation. What word keeps getting repeated? I and myself. So that's a legitimate observation, because sometimes when we begin this pursuit of trying to find happiness, who are we trying to find happiness for? Me. Right in the middle. Happy, I, the little cute little thing that we always say, right in the middle of the word happiness is I. Except that's the point, is that will be futile. Is that if we start thinking that our life is going to be fulfilling because we're trying to fulfill what makes us happy, we will be disappointed. But the things that he mentions, I built houses, the king's palace, probably houses for his family, okay? And how many houses would that have been? Do you think all of those wives and all of those concubines and all of those children lived in his palace? No. So he had to build housing for all of them. So I built those houses. What else did he do? I planted vineyards. He writes for myself, and here's my point. I don't think he built the vineyards so that only he could eat from it. Who was he building the vineyards for? All those people who lived in those houses. The great burden of the life that he brought upon himself of making choices to align himself by covenantal marriage with women for a political reason. There really is only one purpose for concubines, and I think we know what it is. I don't have to say it. Concubines were never given as an exchange for some kind of treaty. They would often be given like horses, but the purpose of a concubine was not a covenant. The purpose of a concubine was pleasure. And so he says, I constructed reservoirs for myself from which to irrigate a grove of flourishing trees. I had to build those waters because I had to build that for all the trees, for all the vineyards. But why am I building all the vineyards? Because when I built those walls, I needed to build all those vineyards because I needed to feed all those people in those houses. Verse 7, and I acquired male and female servants and had slaves who were born in my house. So he keeps adding upon adding incrementally all the things that in his culture made him an outstanding king. And then he adds, I also own livestock, large herds and flocks, more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. I amassed silver and gold for myself, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I gathered male and female singers for myself, and many concubines, the delights of men. So here he's pleasure seeking, with things and possessions. And I have to, because in his mind, he thinks of those slaves, servants, as possessions. And what does he think about all of that? And the concubines. What does he call that at the end of verse 8? The delight of the sons of man. He's not saying this was just my delight. This is what every man thought pursuing pleasure would bring, delight. And then what does he say? So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. My wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. What was my reward? I had pleasure. Now, I don't think everything in here matches the statement in the book of Hebrews, but when it says that Moses refused what from Pharaoh's house? The passing pleasures of sin. Notice where that sin is located for Moses. In the royal house of Pharaoh. Because and I'm not trying to intimate that we have never had a good president. Don't misunderstand. But the very idea of being in a source of power in any country, whether it's in England or whether it's Russia, even though we have this tendency to believe that only democratic presidents or democratic leaders can only be the moral people in the world. And that's a farce that we need to dismiss. But just like in our world, in the ancient world, the sources of... Have y'all ever been to a fundraising campaign party? Okay. Was it one of the biggest parties you've ever been to? Okay. Probably when you walked in there, you probably thought, how much did all of this cost? You know, we think those things. I'm not saying it's ever wrong to spend money on people. Nor am I saying it's a waste. But imagine the parties that Solomon threw, whatever they look like. And when people walked in, what did they all want to be? They wanted to be Solomon, or they at least wanted to be in Solomon's family. Because if I'm in Solomon's family, what am I going to get? All of this pleasure. And I think that's the point that Solomon says. I pursued all of these pleasures that everyone seems to think is going to be meaningful. The emotional needs that it gives, the sensual needs that it gives, the things and the possessions and all that they have. And notice he says in verse 11, then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And I remember one person once made a comment, and I think it was true. How many fingers do you think he lifted to build any of those houses or gardens? How many fingers, how much toil did he ever expend to take care of any of those vineyards or any of those cattle? How much toil do you think he expended? None. I'm not saying that there isn't, I don't think he's lying. But I don't know what it would be like to have so much wealth that I can hire out everything that I need done in my house, in my life. Instantly, the moment that I need it. To live like that. There was a song from the 20s and the 30s. What was it called? It's a barbershop song. Just came to my head. And fleeted out. There you go. Ecclesiastes right there. But he expended it because it was his idea and it was his cost. It's unfair to be unfair to Solomon. But he says, and behold, all of that. was futile, was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. He says in verse 10, the reward for all of this is the pleasure it gives. That's the only reward that it is. But that under the sun is not the pleasure he seeks. The pleasure that he seeks under the sun is meaning. The pleasure that he seeks under the sun is mattering to all of the things that he's talking about. And for Solomon, he says, this self-indulgent life that I've lived is vain. Any questions or comments up to that?
I think you know, and it's not the same, but like the lottery. People.
The what? The lottery, okay.
So much money, so much poverty is spent on the lottery because they think that is the answer. So they're striving after when, you know, you go in and you see these people just in the gas stations just buying lottery tickets. But there's also the proof of the people who have won the lottery, and so then they have it, but then they're absolutely miserable.
Right.
Because it's, you know, it's not the answer. We think it's the answer, and that proves the whole point of, that's not where your treasure should be.
Right.
But we still keep trying.
Still pursuing. George.
Just to comment on the lottery, one of the things that the lottery does is it takes the money out of that community.
Yeah.
If the person went in and bought a loaf of bread, it'd be somebody delivering the bread, it'd be all of that. But as soon as they buy the lottery ticket, it goes to the government.
Right.
And it's gone from that community, so it doesn't.
Help the
generate
community.
else there.
Right.
But one of the things interesting to me here, he talks in, why does all these accomplishments done? You know, it's all still vanity. But at the beginning of verse 2, he says, what does it accomplish?
What use is it?
We're entertaining ourselves. We're
Right.
seeking after laughter. It's not even accomplishing anything.
Right.
I mean, we're coming up on the season I think is the perfect example of following. All the money, all the attention, all the time and effort is spent on the
Super Bowl, Mardi Gras? Okay, I didn't know what you were going for. Yeah, Super
I
Bowl?
mean, it's billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And what changes the day after it's over?
Someone goes to Disneyland, but I'm sorry, I'm being sarcastic. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Nothing changes. It doesn't help our society at all, except for the people who advertise to take our money, right? Yeah. As well as the cost of the tickets. I don't even know what they are. I don't even want to think about it, but I'm sure it's expensive. And that's the point, that we have in our society so many things that manifest this futility. And to me, Mardi Gras is a perfect example of this indulgence. You know, I've heard people say, I'm just going to go to Mardi Gras where I can let it all hang out. so they can go let everything hang out for however long they're going to be there, spend as much money. Most of the time they're talking about getting wasted, drunk, and not being concerned about even on the other end of the country, Las Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We say all those things, and sometimes even in joking ways, but it describes the self-indulgence that when people walked into the court of Solomon, they would have believed, wow, this is wonderful. Okay? And I remember what was that castle that we went to on our honeymoon? Sorry? Hearst Castle. And the media magnet of California. Walking in there and just being amazed by all of that wealth. And then when the bakers, of course I'm talking to the right generation to talk about the bakers of the PTL Club, when they got in all their financial troubles, one of the things that hit the news, if you remember, the only thing that the news ever talked about that was so astonishing about them, that kept coming up in every news report that I saw, remember hearing, was that they had an air-conditioned doghouse. Do you remember that? Air-conditioned doghouse. And even the news, what's wrong with that, right? The news media said, can you believe they're wasting their money on that? But the media wouldn't, okay, I'm going to try to get off my soapbox. There's a whole lot of worse things in the world than an air-conditioned, while we continue to allow prostitution, while we human trafficking, and all the other stuff that we allow in our society because it brings in dollars and it makes people happy. Well, that dog was probably pretty happy to have an air-conditioned doghouse, you know. But anyways, that doesn't justify anything they did wrong. What did you say, brother?
I said he didn't care.
The dog didn't care if it was an air-conditioned or not, right? George?
In my previous career, I flew charters into Atlantic City for the
Uh-huh.
and flew flights into Las Vegas and out. And the flights going are happy, joyous, and the most somber flights there are.
Yeah. They're going home poor. They're going home poor.
Very subdued.
Yeah.
I think of waste.
You think of what?
I think of utility. I also think it holds hands with waste, is that we try to make things that make things easier and better, but in doing so, there's consequence still to, and striving after that. Like, oh, this is gonna make things easier. Plastic
Mhm.
baggies, well, the plastic baggies and the foil, I mean, all that goes in the landfill, and then,
Mhm.
then it affects the environment. So it's just, to me, it's just so, like it talks about, it's so cyclical. And you see, when you can stand back and see the futility, even when it's in the name of, well, this is gonna make your life better,
Mhm.
and, but it doesn't.
I don't know, something you said, this may be a preacher story coming out of the preacher, or it may be an actual memory that I remember. But I remember one of my uncles being, I don't know what the right word is, rebuking? That's probably too strong a word, but made a comment to my other uncle who had just gotten a remote control television. And my other uncle told that uncle, it's going to make you fat because you're not getting up to change the channels, you know. Not getting his exercise, right? Yeah. I don't think that was going to make him fat, you know. But the things that we observe about how progress seems to be progress when it always is, when it isn't always. I'm not saying that let's stop making any progress, but I mean, we have to realize that there are consequences and cycles in that. George?
The birth rate was higher back in the 50s, probably because people wanted children and they could turn the television.
That's right.
I was my dad's remote.
Yeah, you were your dad's remote, yeah. I hear
We
you.
only had 4 channels.
Okay, so we stopped there today, and we're really in the middle of this section. In the writing, chapter 2 and 3 belong together. So read again chapter 2 and 3 for next week, and thank y'all for being here. Brother Goebel, would you say our closing prayer?
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this time we've had to come together and to look at your word. We pray that as we meditate and think about these things, that we will have a better perspective of what our life should be, and what we desire to do, please you in our everyday life. Father, forgive us of our sins and be with those that are having difficulties at this time, those that are suffering, those that are sorry, that you might comfort them, that the comfort that will come through an understanding of your word. Father, again, we thank you for this privilege that's been ours to come and meditate and think about thy word. Be with us now as we depart. Give us safe journeys to where we're going. And may we live every day before our fellow man, that we might glorify your great name. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.